city delight him above all with the monuments. Herling-Grudziński held the city's secret monuments in high regard. I tak o tym pisze właśnie. Zachwyciłem się kościołem Santa Maria della Santa, w którego katakumbach gromadzono czaszki. Podziwiałem kościół Santa Chiara, który uważałem za jeden z najpiękniejszych kościołów we Włoszech. No i stale poznawałem coś nowego, ale ciągle czułem się nieswojo. His favorite church in Naples remained the Santa Chiara's. The monastic complex of Santa Chiara can be found in the old town. He was built in 14th century on the ruins and ancient first century thermal heads. In the austere interior of the church, of the front wall of the channel in the tomb of King Robert the Wise, who indicated the construction of the complex. The crypt and chapels hide the sarcophagi of members of the royal and the Gabanian family and noble-born Neapolitans. The bell ringer of his church became the main character in the short story po polsku przeczytać, tak. Już bohaterem opowiada podzwonne dla dzwonnika, czyli po angielsku tutaj to będzie The Last Bell for the Bell Ringer. I zapisał tak. 29 stycznia 1977 roku zapisałem w moim dzienniku. Dzisiejszy popołudniowy spacer był długi wśród straganów na trybunali. Odezwało się dalekie echo bólu. Ledwo dowlokłem się do świętej Klary. Była pusta, ani żywej duszy. Obsunąłem się na ławkę, lekkie szturchnięcie. Obok stał dzwonnik świętej Klary, maleńki, zasuszony franciszkanin, a w za szerokim habicie, z trupią główką przechyloną na ramię, uśmiechnięty smętnie i jak zawsze wylękniony. Znam go od paru lat. Ilekroć zachodzę do świętej Klary, przechwala się w lichej Włoszczyźnie, że jego dzwon słychać w całym Neapolu. Stał w milczeniu, jakby wahając się, czy mi coś powiedzieć. Wreszcie przybliżył swoją trupią główkę i szepnął mi na ucho. Mówią, że mam chore serce. Chcą mi odebrać mój dzwon. Ocknął się, spojrzał na mnie z ukosa, zniknął mu z twarzy uśmiech. Umrę bez mojego dzwonu. Miałem ochotę pocieszyć go i uścisnąć, kiedy jednak poruszyłem się gwałtownie w ławce, żeby wstać. Obok mnie nie było już nikogo. Another of the places Herling visited was the square and the Jesus Church of the city center. The writer also frequently visited the beautiful St. Dominic's Church associated with the person of the St. Thomas Aquinas. Outside the strictest city center, Herling visited the church of Santa Donna Regina Vecchia. The church is famous for the beautiful frescoes from the 14th century and perfectly preserved tombstones dating back to the late 13th century. Another church where the writer often visited was the Neapolitan Cathedral of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, known as the Cathedral of St. Januarius. The cathedral is where the so-called miracle of St. Januarius takes place after 3 times of year. This is when the blood of the Januaries liquefies. Fascinated by the story, Herling took part in the miraculous celebration in the cathedral. The whole celebration of an unofficial miracle prompted Grudziński to write a book entitled Miracle. Herling was irritated by the shallowness of travel accounts of Nepal. A cheap admiration replaced the effort to get to know the city. Because of this, a false image of it was created. This is how he writes about this. Zapiski cudzoziemskich podróżników z Neapolu, sławnych i nieznanych, są niewyczerpaną kopalnią materiału do niezliczonych antologii. Na ogół jednak krajobrazowe ochy i achy, zachwyty poetów, prozaików, malarzy, filozofów w duchu zobaczyć Neapol i umrzeć, euforia pejzażowa, smakowanie kolorów, muzyki, obyczajów ludowych, poczucie dotarcia do ziemskiego raju. Krótko mówiąc, oleodrukowo-widokowy banał, ładny i pociągający, ale daleki od prawdziwego wzoru miasta. Charles Dickens' travel notes became his model. The English writer was able to see the particularities of Nepal. Herling noted this in his journal. Dopiero w tych dniach, zwłoka niewybaczalna, odkryłem przypadkowo widzenia z Neapolu Dickensa. Był tu parę tygodni zaledwie w roku 1844 i zobaczył tak dużo, że nie mogę wyjść z podziwu jako mieszkaniec Neapolu od prawie pół wieku. Nie brak i u Dickensa dyskretnych zachwytów admiracji, wzruszeń życia rozpętanego, ale w jego odbiorze obok słonecznego Neapolu kolorowego i rozśpiewanego, przeglądającego się w cudownej zatoce, krzykliwego i na pozór wesołego, istnieje przeoczny przez większość podróżników cudzoziemskich Neapol czarny, żałobny, przygnieciony życiem w rozpędzie. Dickens dostrzega groteskowo tragiczny, cmentarny i klasztorny Neapol okrutny, przeciw któremu powstał Masaniello. Neapol niby wielobarwny i beztroski. Neapol wiecznego słońca, który w wielu dziedzinach jest martwy i pogrzebany. Very slowly Herling's reluctant attitude towards Nepal changed, and he noted in his diary, the day before yesterday, czyli tutaj tak przedwczoraj, w niedzielę, pojechałem w trójkę z Lidią do Starego Neapolu. Nowością świadczącą o zmianie mojego stosunku do Neapolu jest odcień dumy w pokazywaniu gościom naszych skarbów. Zaczęliśmy od grobu księcia, muzyku, wielkiego madrygalisty Gesualda w kościele Jezusa. Potem, rzecz jasna, moja ulubiona święta Klara i święty Dominik z freskiem Cavalliniego, krucyfiksem wsławionym dialogami z Tomaszem z Akwinu, jestem we wstępie, reprodukcją biczowania Caravaggia w miejscu, gdzie wisiał oryginał przed przeniesieniem do pinakoteki. Unlike another travelers, Herling became thoroughly acquainted with Naples, its history and its present. He understood what the particularities of the city were all about. What Herling-Grudziński was the most attracted in the Naples was the history, tradition and people. Nie tylko, że są wspaniali ludzie. Teraz może zmieniło się na gorsze, ale zaraz po przyjeździe dostrzegłem niesłychaną serdeczność neapolitańską, która mnie ujęła. Byli to ludzie otwarci. Spacerowałem wieczorami po zaułkach. Kiedy było ciepło, wysuwali stoliki z mieszkań nawet po północy. Popijali wino i zapraszali. Do mnie, który spędziłem 5 lat w Londynie, nie było to zjawisko zaskakujące. Było to dla mnie zjawisko zaskakujące. W Anglii tego nie ma, ani we Francji. Fascynujące jest także to, że tu się wciąż odkrywa rzeczy zupełnie niezwykłe. Neapol, nawet dla historyków sztuki, jest miejscem tajemniczym, nieznanym do końca. Ultimately, Herling appreciated the beauty of Naples, its monuments, its history and its people. He was proud to be a resident of Naples. He recalled that. Był u mnie kiedyś z wizytą mój krakowski przyjaciel, historyk sztuki profesor Tadeusz Chrzanowski. Powiedział mi, słuchaj Tadeusz, pokażę ci rzeczy, o której pewnie w ogóle nie słyszałeś. Rzeczywiście nie słyszał. Pokazałem mu zdekonsekrowany kościół Santa Maria della Regiona. Tak? Kościół jest piękny, flamandzki, gotyk. W środku można oglądać freski Pietro Cavalliniego, wielkiego artysty, który na początku XIV wieku przebywał w Neapolu na dworze króla Karola Andegaweńskiego. A w podziemiach jest grobowiec królowej Marii Węgierskiej, dłuta nieznanego rzeźbiarza senieńskiego Tino de Camayo. In the last year of Herling's life, when he was already seriously ill with a heart condition, at the time where a different experience of the city space, namely walking the road of the health walk, his doctor recommended that he take walks. The sick writer already had a fixed road of wandering. The road began unchanged, going down from the house to the Villa Comunale, the city garden, and walking down the boulevard to the Arbor and Margellina station. It seems that the writer had come to terms with the fate and the city. When asked by Elżbieta Sawicka, "And have you forgiven Naples?" Herling replied, "Moja egzekucja to była tak przykra, że to się odbijało na naszym życiu rodzinnym. Lidia, kochając Neapol, bardzo nad tym cierpiała, że ja nie znosiłem tego miasta. Z ciężkim bólem próbowałem się do niego przystosować, a potem powolutku, w miarę jak udawało mi się rozwiązać rozmaite problemy, przyzwyczaiłem się, a dzisiaj powiedziałbym nawet więcej. Dzisiaj jestem do tego miasta bardzo przywiązany. W jakiś sposób uważam Neapol za moje miasto. Znam je dobrze. Spędziłem tu 40 lat. And of this fascination with Naples, Herling produced 2 of his remarkable short stories entitled The Miracle, November, was written in November 1983, and The Pledge in Naples was written in January 1990, which formed an interesting diptych. Above all, the writer was intrigued by Neapolitans' attitude to death. The place that particularly fascinated him was the Fontanella Cemetery. The cemetery and its catacombs contain numerous uncovered graves, piles of bones and skulls. Many of the remains date back several hundred years. They are mainly victims of the Black Death from the 14th century. The Napoli's intimacy with death was culturally distant for the writer, especially on All Souls' Day. Herling felt this difference. For Herling, cemeteries were not necropolis, but something like the special districts of the city. This is what Herling said about his necropolic interests. Dzień zaduszny 1979. Odkąd zamieszkałem w Neapolu, uderzyła mnie ta zażyłość ze śmiercią. W ciągu tylu lat powinienem się był z nią oswoić, albo przynajmniej rozumieć ją na tyle, by mnie za każdym razem nie zaskakiwała. Ale nie takie to łatwe. Stosunek Neapolitańczyków do śmierci odarty z nieznanego będzie mi zawsze uprzytamniał, jak bardzo jestem w tym mieście obcy i jak bardzo jest mi ono obce. Tutaj poufałość ze śmiercią jest fizyczna i naturalna, jak gdyby Pagiorale było nie cmentarzem, ale odmienną nieco od innych specjalną dzielnicą Neapolu. The spirit of dying and death is present in several short stories, including, for example, The Bridge, The Sore Stretch and the Miracle, and The Flesh in Naples. In the latter two, Herling drew of the 20th century history of the city. In both of these stories, the action takes place in Naples, in the first in 1647 during the Masaniello revolt against Spanish occupation, and in the second in 1656 during a plague epidemic brought from Sardinia by a detachment of Spanish soldiers. The second story is a continuation of the first in both cases. Herling-Grudziński, as he himself emphasizes, remained faithful of the knowledge he had read from the chronicles of the time. Nie wiem, czy już kończy. Bo tutaj jeszcze jest, no jest troszeczkę. Może samo zakończenie, bo tutaj już jest tak, takie podsumowanie. Zastanawiam się, którego momentu. Może tylko powiedzieć, że sama już. Tak. Może już na tym skończę. Nie. Jeszcze 10 stron tego zostało, tak. I już.
I'm really sorry we couldn't hear the end, so I hope we will be able to read it published.
Yes. Its analysis of this text very thoroughly.
It was really very interesting. So thank you. It was very precious to hear about the relation between the writer and the city and the importance of the place in the literary biography. And also about the metaphysical aspects of Gustaw Herling-Grudziński's writings. I would like to invite now Professor Anna Szczepan-Wojnarska. It is a pleasure to introduce Anna Szczepan-Wojnarska, who is an associate professor in literary studies at Cardinal Wyszyński University in Warsaw. She received her MA, PhD, and habilitation at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and was a Sternberg Fellow at the Wolf Institute, Cambridge, UK. She has served as a director of the Institute of Polish Philology, chair of PhD studies at the Faculty of Humanities, and the director of the Department of Literary Studies at the University Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński. She is a member of the British and Polish Joseph Conrad Societies in the function of secretary. She publishes articles and books and also edits volumes on contemporary literature.
And I'm a lucky fellow of Dr. Wyszyńska, because she organized this event. Let me start and go through the presentation. This paper aims to present Herling-Grudziński as a writer and a Polish immigrant who made under Joseph Conrad's influence, but first and foremost who had a living relationship with Conrad. In my reflection today, I will follow Herling's words as the directions how to approach the topic. Grudziński stated clearly in one of the interviews, "Why Conrad is close to me as a writer? Because I share his principles. To be faithful to yourself, to be loyal to the cause you have taken up. This is not my latest literary imputation. I've appreciated the author of Lord James since my youth, and I have remained faithful to him. When I read Conrad, I breathe a different kind of air." End quote. Following Herling's words as the best guides to Grudziński's relation to Conrad, started with fascination, appreciation, went through different various challenges, and ended with his conscious decision to be faithful to Conrad. In my presentation, I look at a little bit at Herling's life, cultural context of already mentioned appreciation, affinities and differences between these two writers, and finally the homoduplex concept and the few simple truths as a Conradian heritage. I would like to address to put the situation into some kind of perspective. Undoubtedly, Joseph Conrad served many Polish immigrants equally as a point of reference because of his patriotic martyrological background and his successful professional career. Józef Teodor Konrad Korzeniowski was a son of Polish patriots who were arrested and sentenced for preparation to January uprising 1863 and plotting against Tsar, who took part in partitioning Poland for 3 times. They were sent, Korzeniowskis were sent to Vologda, and Conrad's father, Apollon Korzeniowski, was one of Polish patriotic poets of the late 19th century, and his figure had a significant influence on Conrad, who himself was not a poet, not a soldier, not a political activist. Conrad's prose mesmerized the young Poles because Conrad's novels asked the utmost important questions in a way that was free from any doctrines in the interwar Poland. Conrad proposed a new look at the paradigm of a few simple truths without pretensions to the pathetic patriotism or revolutionary slogans. Overturning the table of existing public debates focused on politics, he insisted that the most important is responsibility and faithfulness to oneself. Therefore, he became important to Gustaw Herling-Grudziński as a part of the generational experience of freedom for young adults in interwar Poland. As Herling stated, I've appreciated the author of Lord Jim since my youth. So it was long before the war. Although Conrad never fought for Polish independence, he became a spiritual father to the generation who took an active part in the Second World War, especially the soldiers of Polish Home Army, whom the contemporary British historian Norma Davies calls Conrad's children. Conrad gave them lessons on what freedom means, and they followed eagerly his directions. In appreciation of Conrad's prose was heightened in the unexpected situation of the Second World War, and this phenomenon has been described and discussed extensively in Polish and in English. Just to mention Zdzisław Najdek, Stefan Zabierowski, Anna Skolik, or Wiesław Katajczak. Conrad gave them. I would like to draw your attention to the materials published by the Library of Fighting Poland in London. The Big Five, that was the title. The Big Five by George Michael, published in November 1944. After the fall of Warsaw Uprising. This publication includes great names, great five: Copernicus, Kościuszko, Chopin, Curie. And of course, the fifth is Conrad. The publication aimed to appeal to the peace conference participants, to the Big Four, to secure the independence of Poland for its impact on the world's culture. Conrad, just to prove that Conrad was considered as a significant figure. This tiny propaganda printing evidence an extent to which Conrad has been present and actually used in national discourse at the time of war. To Herling-Grudziński, the war brought a severe experience of the Soviets' lager, expressed in his prose, a word apart already discussed during the day. So you all know about that. And of being a soldier of General Anders' army. For his part in the Battle of Monte Cassino, also he was awarded Poland's highest decoration of valor, the Virtute Militari. Grudziński has been mentioned by Melchior Wańkowicz in his 3-volume account of the battle. Before Lieutenant Figel and the radio operator Herling-Grudziński went into action, as Wańkowicz writes, Major Stojewski approached Grudziński and stroked his face. Quote, "I don't know, boy, if you will come back," he says in his own Lviv language, "but remember how much depends on you." After reaching the hill 593, the fight with German paratroopers begins. Another quote from Wańkowicz. Second Lieutenant Figel shouts, "Suppressive fire." The radio operator Grudziński worked all the time as if in trance. He remembers that he opened the station, which began to react, that he caught some distant voices, that he switched to broadcasting, that later he found out the fire was falling. As if through a fog, he realized they must have caught my call. He remembers that he was following the trail of Second Lieutenant Figel, that he worked. End of quote. Herling, whichever way you look at it, it is clear that Herling experienced the cruelty of war physically and psychologically, as many of his generation, because at a certain point he was aware that he was fighting for the lost cause. They were undoubtedly kind of Conradian situations, demanding endurance, fidelity, and courage to encounter reality. 20 years later, Herling wrote, quotation, "It's easy to argue today that 5 months after Tehran, it was already politically superfluous. It is just as easy to make a similar, if not even more firm judgment about the Warsaw Uprising today. There are processes which once set in motion and constantly fostered cannot be stopped one step from its fulfillment without the risk of spiritual captivation for many years. From the beginning, the history of home army was heading towards the uprising, just as the battle was inscribed in the history of the Second Court from the beginning. End of quote from the Hour of Shadows. The Hour of Shadows also refers to the shadow line in Conrad's short story. Herling emphasizes that it's not a blind fate that takes power on, but a chain of consequences of the decision made consciously and purposely. Therefore, he insists on the teleology of human's existence, that there is a telos at the end. Agnieszka Adamowicz-Pośpiech, who wrote on Konrad, enumerates many parallels between Konrad and Grudziński, such as, firstly, the same destination of exile in northern Russia, literally Vologda. Secondly, writing as a profession. Thirdly, a dynamic reception in Poland related to the political situation. And she calls it unintentional biographical affinity. Pośpiech also pointed out that there is also a different, even more important layer of biographical convergence constituted by Herling's deliberate allusions to Konrad biography and his following, sometimes literary, in the eminent predecessor's footsteps. Elsewhere, she analyzes various connections between Konrad's Heart of Darkness and Grudziński's A World Apart. Magdalena Śniedziewska remarks that Gustaw Herling-Grudziński has sometimes used Italian version of his name Gustavo, or only an easier to pronounce part of his Polish surname Herling. Some of his publications in Italian are signed as Gustavo Herling, which reminds Konrad's decision to shorten his surname to Joseph Konrad. Śniedziewska states in her analysis of the Grudziński's relation to Konrad that this relation partly manifests in isolation of a writer, an artist working creatively in a work alien to him. At the same time, though the process of writing and creating an alien word, the writer absorbs and tames this alien word unavoidably. Having this in mind, it needs to be acknowledged that a writer can also preserve his alienation as the last form of belonging to the lost homeland. It gradually becomes different from what he remembers and from what he expects to be. Martha Herling's words inspired me to this reflection because she indicated such a possibility. Quotation. My father was extremely focused on writing. He locked himself in his office where he tried to build his own microcosm, an area separated from Italian everyday life, his little Poland. He needed it very much. It was indeed inhuman, as it required a great effort from him to recreate the Polish atmosphere in Via Christi. We, the children, just like our mother, understood perfectly well that our father needed to be alone. End of quotation. An experience of being alien, the sense of detachment, is on the one hand overshadowed by the loss he experienced, but on the other hand, it's just a part of writer's literary craft. I see Herling's relationship with Konrad as a living one. All unintentional biographical parallels have their share in the general paradigm of fate of Polish immigrants of the 19th and 20th centuries, experience of loss, helplessness towards political powers, disappointment with various authorities, lack of perspectives for the possible return to home country, and encountering indifference of hosting countries towards Polish cause. Furthermore, when the dreams of free Poland came true, many artists, including Konrad and Grudziński, realized that there was no simple coming back possible either. As times passed, challenging the space, culture, and societies, they visited Poland, both Conrad as a British subject, Herling-Grudziński as the Italian subject. And I would argue that both writers came to terms with a sense of impossibility of return, and they were brave enough to realize it. Grudziński differs from Conrad in a very substantial way, as he experienced living in a free country. That hasn't been Conrad's experience. And also he referred to Russia, as has been extensively presented today earlier, while Conrad refused to touch upon Russian topics. Of course, he wrote about Russians, and the Russian figure is almost in every novel, or the first plan, or in the background, but he refused to discuss it. Straight after the war, Grudziński headed the literary section of Orzeł Biały, White Eagle in Rome, published articles in various army periodicals, Kurier Polski, Drodze, Dziennik Żołnierza, Soldier's Daily of the Army in the East. He co-founded with Giedroyć Kultura magazine, co-edited the first issue of the magazine, and after demobilization of the Polish armed forces in the West, he lived in London, then in Munich, and he headed the cultural section of the Polish language service of Radio Free Europe, was a member of Polish Writers Association. Later on, he collaborated with the Workers' Defense Committee Corps and the Polish Independence Agreement. Of course, these examples of Conrad's activities do not constitute the complete map of his engagements, but perhaps give a glimpse into his inner world, combining social and civil activity with a deep sense of solitude. Was he tracing Conrad by getting engaged in all these aforementioned duties and works? Conrad did not engage himself in any comparable enterprises, yet he was not indifferent to Polish cause. As fate would have it, Conrad was in Krakow with his family at the very day that the First World War was declared. As he and his family were now enemy allies, his Polish friends advised him to temporarily move to relative safety of Zakopane. There, the Conrad family stayed at the Konstantynówka guest house, which was owned and run by Conrad's cousin Aniela Zagórska and her daughter also Aniela. And she recorded the following account of Conrad's reaction to the events. Quotation: "He had great respect and enthusiasm for then the commander-in-chief, Piłsudski, but he didn't believe that the efforts of Polish legions would bring about positive results. He feared that more blood would be spilled unnecessarily. He came to Poland after more than 20 years to find himself amid the preparation for an armed attempt to regain independence, and the circumstances could not but remind him of childhood experience. In 1863, Conrad was 6 years old, so he might really remember something of defeat, mourning, helplessness. All his childhood memories revived in this memorable summer of 1914. I shall never forget his expression when he looked at marching legionaries or listened to their songs." End of quote. In fact, Zagórska's assessment of Conrad's views was not entirely correct, for during his stay in Zakopane, the writer did take part in political discussions and private conversations, such as the famous one with Stefan Żeromski. Before his return to Britain, he even drew up a political memorandum which was intended to further the cause of Polish independence, Joseph Konrad Korzeniowski's memorandum on the Polish question, October 1914. And I will skip another quote, just to say that in 1916, Conrad paid a visit to Foreign Office along with his young Polish friend Józef Ratzinger, who had suggested that he will submit the memorandum advocating the restoration of Polish state as a protectorate of Britain and France. Conrad's efforts were in vain, yet Conrad began to take part in pro-Polish events and actually he had a hope for regaining independence. Unlike the January uprising, which ended in a crushing defeat, Piłsudski's epic military venture turned out to be a key element in the process that eventually led to the restoration of Polish state and to the successful defense of its new borders. Getting back to Herling, he had undertaken all his duties and engagements not because Conrad did similar things, but I would argue that Conrad gave him sense of responsibility and shaped or helped to shape him the sense of duty. Moreover, they shaped a comparable sensitivity and consciousness that everything human affects the world. Therefore, responsibility for one's deeds is crucial. I would like to draw your attention to one more issue. As Włodzimierz Bolecki mentioned, quotation, a characteristic component of this writing is taking up stories about people experiencing the drama of their existence in solitude. Gustaw Herling-Grudziński is undoubtedly closer to the tradition of Conrad, who made the conscious of the individual source of human conflicts than to Gombrowicz concept, assuming that human drama takes place between people. That is why the message of this writing is clearly Conradian. The fate of people is unknowable. The world is indifferent to them, often cruel, and only faith in the immovability of moral principles gives an elementary meaning and order. End of quote. The Conradian message can be understood in two ways, as a courage and as a solitude. Empathy and courage characterizes both writers. None of them use a narration that victimizes the subject. That I find that very important. Both artists, Conrad and Herling-Grudziński, were brave enough to look at things as they are, as pointed by Bieńkowska in her book. Human existence goes under the unknown law that cannot be declined. In that context, encountering evil refers to Conrad. It's better to remember the threat of world apart every day, to walk on the earth according to Conrad's advice, and on a thin crust of freshly solidified lava, than to pull the wool over one's eyes turned to the future with the vision of rational human ruler of the universe. To conclude, as I initially declared, I looked at Conrad's words on his relation to Conrad. Their unintentional biographical affinities seems to be their share in the general paradigm of fate of Polish immigrants of the 19th and 20th centuries due to historical and political circumstances. Conrad did not imitate Conrad. Herling did not imitate Conrad, but benefited from Conrad's concept of homo duplex, adopting it to his reality of synoptic lives as a writer, soldier, prisoner, editor, and translator. Herling did trace Conrad in his decision-making process, referring to timeless principles. Also, I would say finally, Herling appreciated Conrad by heart and remained faithful to him by decision. Thank you very much for that.
For this insightful presentation. It was an extremely interesting issue, the relation between the literature and life, the article of ethical principles, and the influence of various political extra-literary factors on the writer's biography in case of Gustaw Herling-Grudziński, as well as in Joseph Conrad's life. Thank you. Now we move on to our next speaker. I would like to introduce Dr. Kowalik. That will present.
Yes, I'm from the University of Warsaw.
Yes, Believing in Values, Commentary to Remark by Gustaw Herling-Grudziński. Łukasz Kowalik is affiliated with the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Warsaw. He works as an editorial assistant in Przegląd Filozoficzny. He is interested in the theory of imagination as a tool for the study of knowledge. And now we can move on to the presentation.
Okay. So this is an essay of 25 pages, and I'm going to read just some fragments, of course. In my The Faith in Values. In my speech, I would like to answer several questions. First, what are values? What is a faith in values? Who is a constant prince? The constant prince is a title of several works in the history of literature. First, Pedro Calderón, the Spanish Baroque dramatist. Then, in our Polish culture, Juliusz Słowacki, Gustaw Herling-Grudziński, Jerzy Grotowski, a famous man of theater. Okay, and the last question, how should we defend Herling against a recent criticism around his person? This year, a book was published by Anna Bikont, a famous journalist, a famous Polish journalist, and she attacks their Herling. So I think it's worth some notice from our part, some attention. And in the last chapter of the shortest guide to myself, Gustaw Herling-Grudziński talks about faith. And he remarks that apart from the religious faith, there are also other kinds of this phenomenon. One of them is the faith in values. We may call it an axiological faith, because axiology is the philosophical theory of values. I'm going to comment on this remark and to explain how I understand the faith in values and what is the relation of that faith to the faculties of human mind, traditionally called conscience and will. Who believes in values? There are two possible answers. The first one, everybody does, although different people believe in different values. The second answer, only some exceptional people believe in values, because this is the case of moral heroes. One of such heroes is Don Fernando, the main character of Spanish Baroque drama, The Constant Prince, by Pedro Calderón. And there is also Herling's short story, The Constant Prince, from 1956. The writer himself commented on this piece of work in detail in his conversations with Bolecki. Let us ask, who is the Constant Prince? Surely, most Herling's readers know that in his short story, the title figure refers to Benedetto Croce, another hero of our meeting, the Italian philosopher who was the inspiration for the fictional character in the Herling's novella. We can remark that there is also another constant prince in the Herling's story, just as there is another positive hero in the original Constant Prince by Calderón. A Muslim warrior, Muley, in Calderón, And in Herling's version, the character based on Croce is confronted with that inspired mainly by Ignazio Silone. Okay, now I skip. And more, even more, still more. And I skip. The nature of values. What do we know about values as such? First of all, values are something that we can find not only in the material world, but what much more seems to exist in the human mind. This is why Plato, the Greek philosopher, claimed that values are ideal beings which only can be perceived by the rational mind and not by our sensual body. So this is the first point. Values belong to the human mind. They exist in our intention. A German neo-Kantian, the follower of Immanuel Kant, a German neo-Kantian philosopher, Heinrich Rickert, said the values do not exist in the real empirical world, but they have importance. They gelten. Or speaking somewhat tautologically, two manners of the same, values are valid. Values are valid in our life. Secondly, they are something essentially practical, something that directs our actions. If we ever talk about values, it is because we want to describe a practical aspect of our life. We want to explain why we do something. Values are exactly the reason why we act. They are the cause of our action. And to be more exact, the so-called, in Aristotelian tradition of Aristoteles, final cause. What means they are something we have in mind as an intentional aim whenever we do something. Thirdly, values can be referred to in some different ways. There are several levels of pointing to values, but this I skip. Fourthly, there are some different kinds of values. Here we can make use of the ancient tradition of Platonic ontology, which distinguished three different domains of being, or three different kinds of objects: bodies, souls, and ideas, or in a modern version, material things, psychological states of mind, intentional states of mind, and lastly, meanings of the expressions of our language. In brief, there are things, thoughts, and words. This is why ancient Greek philosophers used some different axiological categories: goods, material things; virtues, mental dispositions to action; or just values, any sort of being appreciated by someone. Fifthly, at last, values are something strongly relative to a person, although we should not exaggerate it by saying that they are strictly subjective and personal. It is certainly a fact that every one of us has their own view on what is valuable and what is not. But I skip. To sum up, the system of values contains representations of things important to us in our life, but it also includes some convictions necessary to choose what is for us more and what less important. This is then what our axiological credo, confession, the axiological faith looks like in practice. Okay, now we skip it and skip more. And finally, one of our main claims on the occasion of this axiological analysis: the values someone feels emotionally attached to, or in other words, the values which direct somebody's life, can be identified as the values this person believes in or has faith in. Having faith signifies exactly being faithful or loyal to something one chooses as being his own. The faith in some particular values becomes then an indirect characteristic of a person's individual self. the constant prince, no time. Back to the current controversies. I think it's really important, although not very pleasant topic. The original project of my speech had to be modified. This was due to a strong criticism that Herling's person provokes today in Poland. This very year, a book was published by a renowned Polish journalist, Anna Bikont. Under the Polish title is "It was neither an end nor a beginning, the after-war choices of Polish Jews." And under this title, one can find, among other moving stories, a critical chapter on Herling. The text is, anyways, a culmination of a series of similar reproaches made for a long time, especially since Herling's death. I would like to defend the Herling's choice by a simple remark that his own axiology attaches a special importance to the right to be whoever one feels. In Bikont's book, the chapter on Herling is entitled "He Who Renounced His Ancestors to be Polish," or "On a Poisoned Memory," end of quote, poisoned memory. In this title's quoted sentence, we can easily read two bitter reproaches or even accusations, unfortunately based on unfair suggestions. First, Herling would have renounced his ancestors, which sounds like he deliberately abandoned or even betrayed them because he desired to be celebrated as a great Polish artist. And Polish national culture does not accept any Jews. It is a suggestion. Very true. Secondly, his attitude was a form of illness or disease because he was poisoned. And moreover, he was not only ill himself, but also infected others. His memory was both manipulated and manipulating, poisoned and poisoning. It is clear to me that Bikont's suggestion, shared with many other fellow authors who kept attacking Herling after his death, can be identified with, also quoted in her book, words by a Polish Jewish writer, Henryk Grünberg. Quote, "There are Jews who do not want to be Jewish, to the degree that they hate Jews because by them they are considered Jewish, and they pay anti-Semitic ransom from the Jewish property." Herling-Grudziński is here a classic, end of quote, by Henryk Grünberg and Anna Bikont. I find this verdict especially painful in relation to Herling and dishonorable as a polemical argument. Herling's personal position, which provoked so much anger in his critics, goes in his words as follows. When his biographer Zdzisław Kudelski wrote that Herling was born in a Jewish family, Herling reacted in a letter. "I was born in a Polish family of Jewish origin." End of quote. When Bikont herself asked Herling in 2000, in an interview which Herling refused to authorize in the original form, quote, a question by Anna Bikont, "You do not feel your Jewish roots at all, do you?" Herling replied, "No, I don't. I have Polish roots. This is how I feel. There is nothing I can do." End of quote. It is most probable that Herling wanted to think of his own national identity in the way he thought of the Joseph Conrad's one. Quotation, "Conrad was Polish in the sense that he had the feeling to be Polish. This is why I always keep saying," Herling says so, "Conrad is a great English writer of Polish origin. It is obvious," that now my comment, "it is obvious that Herling was a great Polish writer of Jewish origin. It seems that people like Bikont do not want to accept this truth as simple as it is." Okay, and now I have 5 minutes. Thank you. Now a little about Herling's conservative axiology, a slightly conservative axiology, similar to Joseph Conrad's one, of course. But let's go like this. During the World War II in 1940, At the time when Herling was arrested and sent to a Soviet labor camp, young poet Czesław Miłosz, who later became famous and was awarded Nobel Prize in Literature, wrote an essay entitled Duty, where he referred to Joseph Conrad's novel, The Rover, Korsarz in Polish, and made some remarks on the nature of human conscience. According to young Miłosz, human conscience is a, quote, a loyalty to something deprived of logic, unclear yet strong, a faithfulness to a once given but unspoken promise. End of quote. Miłosz goes on to even say that a blind imperative of duty is something as much self-evident as faith and love. The questions like, why do you believe? Why do you love? Why do you fight? Are pointless, according to Miłosz. And presumably under the influence of the German philosopher Max Scheler, Miłosz adds, equal is the reality of the phenomena like honor, bravery, faithfulness, and of those like summer storm, day, night, winter road. Okay, and in this Conradian tradition, moral conscience becomes an irrational force which directs our actions and determines our will and our personal identity. In my speech today, I refer to this invisible force by Herling's words, and I call it faith in values. This faith precedes our actions. It precedes the decisions of our will. However, we cannot say that we are determined by this force, that we live under some fatalist power which makes our decisions necessary, and that therefore we lack freedom in our life. On the contrary, this force cannot take away our freedom, because this force is itself our freedom. And we are this force, and we are our own freedom. Actions dictated to us by our axiological faith are actions of our freedom. Yeah, our will is the ability to conform our actions to our faith. And this means to conform our deeds to the values we choose to serve in our life. Yet only some of us do it in such a masterly way that it becomes a precious example for others. And this is how they merit a symbolic honor to be remembered as constant princes. Now I go to the end. And let's go on with the question about freedom. Are we free or not when responding to the call of values? Plato, once again, the Greek philosopher, Plato's symbolic answer uses paradox deliberately and provocatively, telling a mythical story, a fable of souls choosing their own destiny. Everybody determines their own fate. Destiny, fatum, not faith, la fede. They freely, the souls, establish their own necessity in the sense that they choose what they feel is their duty, the principal concern in their life. This is the meaning of the Platonic formula in his Republic. I quote in Greek, aitia helomenu theos anaitios. The fault rests on him who chooses. God or fate is not to blame. And now the last paragraph. We should now ask, what is the position of the pair, axiological fate and practical will, in relation to freedom? In my opinion, it is not bad to maintain here the paradoxical attitude of Plato. The axiological faith in values is free because it is us, our conscience, our soul, who are this faith. The practical will to act is also free because it just signifies a choice made by us every day from, so to say, a catalog of possible actions available in a situation. So we are free and inevitably free. Herling lived in the times which were also those of Jean-Paul Sartre, and all those thinkers and artists from this freedom tradition, and all they agree that we are free without any excuses. This is the quote of Sartre. Sans excuse. In the drama by Calderon, when one of the characters hears that the other acted under constraint or violence, he responds by a strong negation. No hay violencia. Paradoxical, violence does not exist, because there is no other necessity for someone who believes in values than to remain faithful. It is precisely because we are free that in our freedom we can happen to be constant or not. If we are, it means that we are faithful to values, or in other words, we have faith in them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this insightful, interesting presentation about faith and values. We could also experience the return of Joseph Conrad and Ignazio Silone. I think this session has provided valuable insights into the themes of values, ethics, and extra literary factors in literary biographies. I would like now to invite questions from the audience. Maybe we'd like some questions for our speakers.